it's basically existential anxiety. Like, why am I here? What am I doing here? What is the meaning of everything? Why are my thoughts here? Are my thoughts really mine? Seeing people as robots, understanding perfectly that there were people and what are hands, what are feet, what are legs, but seeing them in a depersonalized way, like in a robot-like way, and seeing myself also like that. So like, what is my head? What is my neck? Why can't I understand why my hands are here? You know, and you just go on a loop, and you can get out. It's difficult to get out of that loop.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Hugo Ugon from Lisbon in Portugal. Hugo is 33 years old. Over the last 20 years, he struggled through 4 separate episodes of depersonalization. As he wrote to me in an email earlier this year, quote, "This is the 4th DPDR crisis I am in. They occurred at 14, 16, 18, and now it's happening again. I'm struggling with existential OCD and depersonalization after a long period of trauma." But fortunately, Hugo has since made a complete recovery, and he's with us today to talk about his experience with and recovery from DPDR. Hugo, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. It's very good to be here with you and to talk about my experience.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the channel. Thanks for being with us, Hugo. Hugo, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I have a PhD in physics engineering. I don't work on research right now. I'm working more in the corporate side of things. I play in a band called Too Many Sons. It's a bit of free publicity here. Basically, yeah, music is probably my biggest passion. I live in Portugal. And basically I have a kind of normal life in general, besides these 4 episodes of DPDR that you mentioned. And I think it would be I'm very grateful to share my experience, because I know when people are in this state, sometimes it's nice to hear about other people's experience and have some hope. I think I feel let's say a great deal of responsibility here, because I remember myself in that state, and I think it's very important sometimes to understand that others also go through it.
For sure. I think I see a guitar in the background, Hugo, do I?
It's an acoustic guitar.
Nice.
I bought it some years ago.
Yeah, great stuff. What can you tell us a bit about more about your music, your band, Too Many Sons?
Yeah, it's a kind of an indie rock band. It has influences from a lot of influences from folk, from alternative rock, from Brit rock, kind of like Pavement, Sonic Youth. Also some influences from Blur, Stone Roses, and many others. And if you are interested, just check it out. It's on every platform you can imagine. It's Too Many Sons, and it's part of my life. It's not a hobby. Sometimes people think of it. People know me that they tell. Yeah, it's your hobby. It's not that you have a hobby. And I tell them, no, it's not a hobby. It's something that I really need to do. And it's kind of a parallel to my work. And it's one of my big passions. Just
That's great.
Being able to create art and share it with my bandmates and to the other people, it's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll make sure to share the links in the comment section, in the link description, so if people want to check out the music, they can go and check out the links. So Hugo, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with DPDR and how did it start for you?
Yeah, well, it first started when I was 14. When you are 14, it's very common that you are experience a lot of changes, hormonal changes in your life, or becoming a teenager, or kind of experiences some what is like some parts of adulthood and stuff. And I smoked the joint, and I was with some friends. I smoked the joint, and I felt really relaxed and peaceful. And suddenly, 2 days after that, I was just like, the feeling was being struck by a lightning. I didn't know who I was. I remember I was with my parents, and I went to the bathroom. I was in a restaurant, and I just asked my mother, just, "What is happening here? I just don't feel okay." And from then on, it was very difficult for me, because it was 2004. There was not the information that now you have and you can rely on. There was only the bad part, the forums, everyone just saying this is like the worst thing ever, and I would just almost only had the negative input. And now I stayed like that for quite a while, until I went to see a shrink, psychiatrist, and he's still my psychiatrist. And fortunately, I had a good experience. He told me right away, this is depersonalization. He kind of finished my sentences, so I felt really validated. Oh, okay. Because if you understand, like, you are 14, 2004, there's no YouTube. There's only like shady forums everywhere and blogs. So I thought, okay, my life is over. What the heck is this? Like, I just don't feel right. This is awful. I don't need to go on and on. People that are in that situation know what I'm talking about. And so for a while, even my parents, my mother so there's probably some kind of genetic part in this. My mother and my grandmother, there were parts in their lives when they described, they went through some similar things. When my mother was 28, and my grandmother, which is not here anymore, she would be 100 years old yesterday, so it's nice to remember that. And she also went to some things. So there's probably some genetic part on this. I don't know, and it's kind of irrelevant also to dwell on that. But she kind of helped me, saying I felt kind of those things. So in that way, I felt a bit validated. But only in my case, it went well. When I saw the psychiatrist, I felt really, okay, there's a door that may be open for me to get out of this. There's a guy here which knows what I'm talking about. And that made a huge difference at the time. I took some SSRIs at the time, which helped. I don't know if they help, if they were placebo. At least they didn't make anything bad. In my case, I think everyone should be. This is, of course, not a doctor. You are not either, so this is a sensitive topic. But I think, in general terms, everyone should check their own case and how they react to their own stuff. But in my case, at least it didn't do any harm. And after a while, when I think it kind of passed away 1 year after, so it lasted 1 year. After that, I was kind of recovering, and my uncle suddenly died. And I liked him a lot, and he died suddenly from a stroke. And that kind of reignited the issues. They were a bit different. So I knew that I had it. I knew I could recover. So it was not the same, in your face, DPDR, what is this? That was probably the worst time in my life, because it was really, really overwhelming. Not knowing what the heck was going on, what was going through. So this second time was kind of a mix between mourning and anxiety, and it was kind of really a shock in the whole structure of my family, etc. This also lasted kind of a year. It kind of faded away, but it had very intense periods. And then it happened again when I was entering university. Again, very, it's a difficult time. You're adapting to new situations. It's university, more responsibility, probably lack of sleep, a lot of nights out, and again, I smoked a joint. I had a huge panic attack. I was not seeing things, but it was kind of a huge bad trip that gave me a huge panic attack. And then day after, well, you guess it didn't pass, so it stayed. The usual story. I was like, oh my god, this didn't go away, and I stayed like that for some months, I could say. And then I started seeing a psychotherapist. I started doing like how do you say, cognitive behavior, CBT, and that helped a lot because I started to unwind all the stuff that was going in my head and in my body, and also to kind of understand that things could not be solved in a minute like that. Like, okay, right now I don't have DPDR. So after the course of like, I could say like 1 or 2 years, I was already okay from the DPDR symptoms, but I started understanding that from also from the therapy, that sometimes instead of going to the Freudian side of things, because sometimes this when I say Freudian, it's of course a generalization. If you go to like deep to your relation with your father and with your mother, and deep stuff related with your inner psychology, you should start first to sleep well, do some sports, don't overdo the sports, don't drink so much so frequently, try to stay healthy. And this was a major breakthrough because I'm a very introspective person. So I always thought that I could solve everything out of my thoughts, And suddenly I was there, constantly asking for reassurance to a therapist, like, but what did I have? Am I crazy? Why am I feeling this? And she was saying, yeah. Did you sleep well last night? What can you do to feel a bit better with your own body, with your own sleeping schedule, and I was like, this is weird. I'm with a psychologist. I'm trying to understand my deeper fears, and she's telling me to do some sports and sleep better. And this was kind of a trick I think she used at the time to make this contrast between my inner voyages, let's say, and the outer experience. And it worked at that time. I was 19, 20. Because I started to understand when I started doing that work, paradoxically, I don't know if that's a word, I started to understand the inner thoughts, the inner problems. Let's say the more psychodynamic stuff, the Freudian stuff, when I wanted to go there directly, I could not understand anything. But when I started feeling better and sleeping better and feeling less anxious, then I started to understand. Yeah, probably in my childhood, in my childhood, I overprotected myself in order to not feel some certain things, and this deeper stuff. This is also important, but at least in my experience, and I think this applies to a lot of people. Sometimes you need to first go to the more direct and easy things to tackle, which are: do you smoke like a packet of cigarettes a day? Probably if you do that, you are hiding your own feelings on some escapism. Probably if you do that, you cannot go running for 10 minutes because you smoke 20 cigarettes a day. And if you don't run for 10 minutes or do any kind of sport, probably you sleep worse. If you sleep worse, it's a snowball. And when you start doing that, I wouldn't say superficial, but more direct work, then you probably, at least in my case, you understand out of the blue, when you least expect those deeper stuff. But this was my experience. I don't know if this applies to everyone, but at least I think to some people it would apply. That don't try to. It's very, when you are in that DPDR state, you always want to go to the core, and I want to know, but this feels so real and this is so awful, and yeah, but you have to be comfortable with the fact that you don't know. For some time you will not know. Yeah, and I kind of was explaining my history, and I didn't go to the last part. Okay, this last part, in my fourth DPDR, it basically, without disclosing a lot of my personal life, but basically my father got ill, very ill, and it was a very unfortunate situation from a fish bone that perforated his esophagus, and the chances for him to live were low, and it was a very stressful situation. I found him laying on the floor, took him to the hospital, and then the doctor said, yeah, don't expect much of this situation. I felt all my life falling apart. My mother would be alone. My father would die because of a fish bone. And I was coming from a separation with my girlfriend that we reunited after that. We managed to reunite, but as you know, a separation is difficult. Reuniting is also difficult because you have to work on the stuff that made the separation to happen. So this was difficult and tough, and we are still together. So it worked out, but this happened on top of that. Meanwhile, this situation with my father gave me a lot of stress. Situation with my girlfriend also gave me a lot of stress, and I was sleeping poorly, and I changed my job, which was probably not the best decision at the time, but I made it whatever. And I was basically living on the edge, living on the top of my toes. And one day, it always seemed, everyone that has DPDR, almost everyone says the same thing. It's just one moment. I remember that exact moment. I just woke up, I looked at the mirror, I was like, who am I? But if you look carefully, it's not one moment. It's a great amount of things that revealed in one moment. And it's very painful. And often you find yourself mourning that day, that day that before that day I was okay, and after that day I was in a bad state. But if you look carefully, that day was just the end of your, like what Gabor Mate says, when the body says no. The body said no, just stop it. I cannot handle this anymore. And it's a defense mechanism. And it's a tough defense mechanism. That's why you put ice when you have an accident, or you bust your knee. You put ice on it because the swelling is a defense mechanism. But sometimes our body and our minds are not the smartest to act on our diseases. And in this case, when it becomes chronic, it's kind of an overshoot of a defense mechanism in my view of things. And well, I had a huge DPDR bout. Then I tried to manage it for a while, and after a while, me trying to manage it, I just started having panic attacks every day, and I was like, oh my god! At some point, I stayed all night long with a huge panic attack that lasted like 12 hours. And it's one of the worst things you can have. And I was about to get internalized because I mean, go to the hospital, just put me on the bed, give me something, because imagine that you're like 12 hours just feeling like you're going to die. It's like the worst feeling ever. I just want, just give me something, put me to sleep. I don't know. It was a horrible situation. Now, I think this is the good part. I had a huge, massive episode, and because I had all this experience with DPDR, instead of this massive episode lasted in this critical stage for weeks, it just decayed really fast. I mean, not the DPDR, but this critical stage. So much that people would ask me, really, you were in that state like 3 days after? Because I had the experience, so I managed to use my resources that I had here and kind of solve the situation faster. Now, I stayed in this state where I never had any panic attack more since that major crisis. It was like in February this year, but I stayed in a state of vigilance. Even though I had this experience with DPDR, it had been 15 years, so I was not used to anymore to deal with these critical situations. But I had this experience of this will pass, this will go away. Unfortunately, and I think due to everything joined together in the same, it was like the perfect storm. So this one just lasted more. Because during these 15 years, yeah, sometimes I would have like one panic attack or a beginning of a panic attack, and I was like, oh, this is the DPDR, and it would just fade away. This one got stuck because it was so high, so critical that I needed to. It needed more time to be handled. So during this time, it was a roller coaster. I just your DPDR manual was a big help because it was very difficult for me to in the beginning to stay out of reassurance. Just type in YouTube, Reddit, whatever, because you are in this state which I remember rationally, but I cannot remember emotionally. I think it's something kind of a lot of people. I've seen some people talking to you that they tell it's very common. It's like you can remember rationally, you can tell the story, but you don't emotionally. You cannot make the shortcut to how you would feel in that time. So basically, let's say 80% of my day was occupied about on thoughts or preoccupations on DPDR in the beginning. And your program was nice because I would have kind of this shortcut that I would use as a shelf where I can go on, and it can make me more calm. And if I feel the urge to go on to see a DPDR story of a guy or a girl that has it for 20 years, I would go to the DPDR. And of course, besides all the great information that you put on there, for me, it was also very, very useful just to put it on repeat, just to kind of a mantra. Yeah, this is very difficult. It's going to be good days and bad days. That was kind of a mantra when I was in a bad day. Now, what I can tell you to the people listening is that it lasted several months and it had a lot of ups and downs. And it's in the downs that the good things happen. You'll feel anxious and you'll need to probably go on a forum or whatever. Just if you spend 3 hours on a forum, try next week to spend just 1 hour and a half. Just do this kind of work. And that's what I did. I'm going to run today like 5 minutes. And then the next day or next 2 days after, I'll run 6 minutes. Because I would feel anxious after the sport also. Everything would make me feel anxious. My brain or my body was like a sponge prone to anxiety. And it's very tough, because when you are doing the work in the beginning, you don't feel right away the results. So you feel like the work is for nothing, but it's not. This is something that I feel it's worth mentioning, because when you are in the last parts of recovery, everything you do which is good, you feel already, you feel the effects right away. Yeah, I went running, I feel so bad, the DPDR is not here. But in the beginning, you go running, you feel more anxious, or you may feel more anxious. So this is tough, because you feel like you're doing the stuff and you don't see the return right away. But this is not true. It's kind of, the issue is that in the beginning it takes more time for this good return to happen. And so my work was that. Sports, very important. Non-reassuring. Bad days, like, don't constantly ask your girlfriend or your parents or your friends, like, am I going to be better? Just ask it, but not constantly. Because if you do that, it loses value. Don't try to reduce the forums, or don't go. Of course, it's the goal is not go there. Try to lower compulsions. Try to do sports the best you can, or go for a walk, and don't get discouraged when you do all this stuff and there's the worst day after like 2 or 3 weeks, because this actually happened, and you say that in your program, and it's actually true. It's just randomly you have like a really bad day. It's like what you have in normal life. Sometimes there's a bad day, but when you are in this state, that bad day turns in the worst day ever, because you are struggling with DPDR and all of these anxiety issues. After a while, after a lot of ups and downs, it's like the curve is like this. It's like the ups and downs get lower, and so the amplitude of the ups and downs get lower, and you start feeling better and better each time, and more stable. Not only better, like the overall curve gets better. It's of course tougher to get better in the end, because there's less to get better, but the ups and downs start to get to have less amplitude, so you'll feel more stable. And after a while, if you continue doing that stuff, you'll reach a point sometimes where the good starts beating the bad, and you can do a snowball in reverse. What I felt was like I was having a snowball in, like, anxiety would make me more anxious, which would give me more anxiety, which would make me more anxious and have more OCD and more weird thoughts, and I would think I was schizophrenic, all of the DPDR stuff. And after a while, if you keep pushing, you just keep pushing, keep working on yourself. There's a time where the snowball reverses, and this is really nice, because it's like a compound taxes. I don't know if you say that in English, but it's like the good makes you more good, which makes you more good, which makes you better. It's exactly the opposite that was happening in the beginning. And this, in my opinion, is the stage of recovering. And actually, the first signs of recovery for me was like, yeah, I'm feeling awful, but I don't care. I'm just gonna read a book. And I would just be 2 hours reading a book, and I don't care. Yeah, it's here, but I have stuff to do. And I would feel bad, feel awful, but in the end of the day, yeah, I put something that my day was not focused completely on the PDR. And this, don't fool yourself. It's a gradual process. And if you think you're gonna wake up one day, like what put you in this situation was also a gradual process, probably. Even though if you took LSD or cannabis or whatever, there was stuff in your life that just revealed themselves in the moment of frailty. So it's also a gradual process to get better. And this was my story in this last DPDR bout. And I guess I end, sorry if I spoke too much, but I end my story here. I didn't speak too much about the details of what I felt, but I can do it if you think it's important for the people listening.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and just to be clear with the timeline as well, Hugo, and thank you for going through that with us. So you at 14, you got it from weed. It was triggered by weed, and that lasted for about a year. Then your uncle died when you were 16, and then that lasted for about a year as well.
Yeah.
Then when you were 18, it was from weed. Again.
Yeah,
and that lasted for a couple of months. Yeah. And then when you were 32, that's when your dad was sick and you were going through the breakup, and then that lasted for most of the year, is it? Or for a couple of months again?
I guess it's like the anxiety was like a huge peak. Like I didn't feel for years, but then it quickly decayed because of my experience with DPDR and stayed in this kind of, let's say, management state, like a damage control state for a long time. So it's probably not the typical DPDR in the sense that the one I had when I was 14, that was like completely, like a tornado. What is happening? Why am I looking at my hands and I feel like they're not mine? Why are we alone in the world? All these existential issues. This one, because I had the experience, it stayed in this damage control with of course some peaks of anxiety for like I would say 6 months. Yeah. But it was different from the first ones because I was already had the means to deal with it.
It was so good to hear you say that, like, when you had it in 2004 and you found a psychiatrist who knew what it was, because I got it in was it 2005? So I got it a year later, and I didn't find. I mean, I did find a therapist, a psychologist, who kind of recognized it as a transient symptom. But I mean, it took me so long to kind of get any answers. I mean, I found stuff on the internet that explained it, but I mean, it's so good to hear that you found a psychiatrist who was able to explain to 14-year-old you that, like, this is called depersonalization, and that must have been such a relief.
Yeah, such a relief. For the first time, I felt that there's some hope, and I think hope is a big issue. And in this last bout, there was some times that I would not feel. It was difficult for me to find hope. I think there was also some depression involved from all the stress I had been and not processed. The hope never went away, but I think hope is when you start feeling hopeful, and it's kind of a sign that things are going in the right way. And at that time when I went to see my psychiatrist, I felt hope, like, oh my God, there's the man here who knows what I'm talking about. And there's a way out. And also my therapist, which she's still my therapist nowadays. I went to see her again in these last times, and I'm still seeing her. And she also was a big help. She was not confused about my story. Let's say she was able to deal with that with the DPDR sensations and ways to go around it. Also in a good manner.
That's great to hear. And speaking of which, Hugo, can you tell us a little bit more specifically about the symptoms and sensations that you experienced across this time?
This last time, this last bout was just like, what is thought? Why can I hear my own thoughts? Why can I hear my own thoughts? What is conscious? What is conscious? What is being conscious? Why are my thoughts? Are my thoughts mine? Are they? I was in this constant existential war against myself. Like, but what really are thoughts? And now being recovered, when I look at it, it's actually it can be quite interesting or quite frightening, because actually it's kind of a weird thing. What are thoughts? But when you are in this emotional state and going through DPDR or existential OCD in my case, which was quite connected, it becomes your focus. And if you focus, like try to take 1 hour of your life and focus that we are a small ball in the universe in the middle of nothing. For the right person, it can become frightening. For another person, it can become really interesting. But if it's your focus in life, you will stop eating, you will stop dreaming about beautiful stuff, you will stop creating art, because you'll just focus on, why the hell am I here? This doesn't make any sense, and it can drive you crazy. If you go to a house which is completely white and has nothing on it, you'll become crazy, because this is not the way to live. You're supposed to see green and nature and live in the world. If you focus primarily on one thing for hours and hours and hours, it will drive you crazy. And I think that the work on recovery is like understanding that, I'm having this issue, but there are other things, and let's try to relieve these other things. Let me go for a paddle game with some friends and see how I feel. Probably I won't feel really good, but at least I went. And after a while, you have to believe it, because in the beginning it will not feel like that way. You will actually go to a paddle game and just think about the paddle game, but it takes work to go to that state. So in this bout, as I was saying and answering to a question, this bout of the DPDR, the latest one, that was primarily my focus. Why do I think like I think? So, and are the others thinking who am I? Like kind of this solipsism, OCD, like it's tough to describe it, but it's like it's basically existential anxiety. Like, why am I here? What am I doing here? What is the meaning of everything? Why are my thoughts here? Are my thoughts really mine? What is this, and why this happens? I think it differs from people to people, so I have to be careful saying that. But I think I can say this with some security. A lot of this is being very tired. So your brain has only some amounts of resources, and if you just overload it for months or sometimes years, sometimes it snaps, and you just go on a loop, and you can get out. It's difficult to get out of that loop. So a lot of it, I think, is being tired, and not tired not in the common sense, but like really tired. Like you need a reset in your body and your mind. So this was the main one in this part of DPDR. It's probably a bit different than what people usually describe, but it was DPDR. I would feel weird looking at the mirror. I would feel these peaks of anxiety. I would feel like, what am I doing in this world? Sometimes I would see, the 2D foggy derealization stuff. But it was mainly that, because I had the resources to deal with the other stuff. So my brain kind of focused on something that I had not worked on. So I think it's our bodies are really clever when it comes to defense mechanism. So it went to something that I had never I have never dealt with before. So it latched on, because all the other things I had already dealt. The other bouts of depersonalization were seeing people as robots, understanding perfectly that there were people and what are hands, what are feet, what are legs, but kind of feeling them, seeing them in a depersonalized way, like in a robot-like way, and seeing myself also like that. Like, what is my head? What is my neck? Why can't I understand why my hands are here? This is the typical one that people often describe. Also looking at the sky and being really frightened, like, what is the meaning of being here when we are just overwhelmed with universe and sky? And this is something that, if I think of it now, it still kind of makes me, yeah, man, it's really weird we are here with such a vast universe. But it's something that can actually make me a bit anxious, like, but it's not the same. It's not that DPDR feeling that it's the focus of my life. I have lunch I have to do in a couple of hours. I have a girlfriend. I will have a rehearsal today. We have some concerts, So I'm not gonna focus on the universe the rest of the day. And I don't know, other ones like don't feel parts of, stopping feeling parts of my body, having weird thoughts like, why is a cat, and why are we like we are? Does a cat feel like a human feels? And this would make me crazy. Like, the thing is, like, it's very difficult, and I feel a lot of empathy with the people, that go through this, because I went through this. Because we are people that go through DPR are just like all the other people. But as you can imagine, it's very difficult to share with someone. Like, I think my hands, sometimes I look at my hands and I know that they are mine, but I feel like that they're not mine. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm here talking and kind of exposing myself, because I think it's very difficult for people in this situation to understand how, for the other people to understand this and don't judge the other. Like, this guy is just bonkers. He's out of his mind. What the hell? Just looks at people and thinks that they're robots. And I think they're being I guess the second most frequent psychological illness. Let's say, I don't know if illness is the right word, but psychological condition in UK, I guess. I think there should be more knowledge about it, so that people would not feel so. I'm an extrovert person, as you can see, but a lot of people are not. So it's difficult for a lot of people to just come out and expose themselves and ask for help and say, I'm feeling this. Am I crazy? This is the first step, but for some people, it's easier than for others. And I think the general knowledge, the reaction of others, which I understand. If someone just came to me and say, look, I think my hands are this, or I'm looking at the sky, and probably a lot of people would be not very empathic with it. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, not at all. Not at all. And Hugo, throughout all of this experience with it, 4 different bouts of DP lasting years and over the course of decades, What would have been your lowest point in the whole thing? Is there a specific time or experience that sticks with you?
Yeah, when I was trying to manage it for a month, and then me and my girlfriend went on a vacation, and we were in a hotel, and I was a whole night up with a huge panic attack, and the next day we just came to Lisbon, to our hometown, and I was actually thinking about going to a psychiatric hospital because I was not being able to handle it. That was my lowest point, and I'm happy to say that like 2 or 3 days later, I was already in a much better state than that because of my DPDR experience. But that was the lowest point. It was really. It's even difficult right now for me to talk about that because it has some traumatic feel to it that I think I will be. I still need some time to process that, even though I'm recovered. There are still some stuff which were traumatic, and I think they will take a while more to process. That was my lowest point. Besides that, it was just I had low points, but that was the lowest.
Something you mentioned, like the feeling of tiredness, the feeling of being chronically tired, and it's not just a physical tiredness, like, but it's something that people describe to me all the time, and I remember this as well, being absolutely exhausted all the time. And I'd have days like where I'd wake up in the morning or like in the late morning or early afternoon, and the whole day I wouldn't do anything. I'd just be like at the computer researching DPDR, just watching the TV or whatever. And then by the time the evening came around, I would be I couldn't move with the tiredness. I'm absolutely exhausted. And I was 25. I was and I was like, how is this possible? How could I be this tired? But of course, when your fight or flight system is on throughout the day, it's absolutely exhausting. Like your metabolism is moving more quickly than normal. Your thoughts are racing. That even on its own is tiring. And of course, you feel absolutely exhausted. But then you catastrophize that means that something is wrong, when in fact it's just part of the anxiety. I really liked what you mentioned about the snowball in reverse thing.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely what it is. Is that when we start to recover, the mistake that we can often make is that we think that we're trying to find a light switch. Because it feels like it happens so fast at the start that it was a light switch. So I need to find that light switch and turn it off.
Yeah.
But in fact,
what did I do that make me?
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas, as you said, and the thing that Gabor Mate says, that like the body just kind of builds the stuff up over time. It's like filling up a cup, and then at some point the cup just starts to overflow, and the body says, "Okay, no, that's enough." So, what you do in recovery is you kind of reverse that process, like so that feedback loop that has caused the anxiety to go up, you start to reverse it, and it's when you start to kind of see. I remember for me, like when I started to see results with that, and they were small results.
Yeah, but they were very small.
Yeah, I'd have like a couple of minutes where I was able to read a book or watch a movie or something.
Yeah.
But when I saw that I could do that, it was very exciting, because I was like, well, now at least I have a direction that I can go in. It might take a while, but at least now I'm not just kind of in this kind of vortex or this washing machine of just not knowing what on earth to do, and no one can help me. But you do see those gradual improvements. And as you say as well, you don't see the returns right away.
Yeah.
Or at least you don't see big returns right away. But what you do see are small incremental improvements building up over time. And when you do things like, as your a psychologist, I think, was saying to you about like, exercising and sleeping right and eating right. And I remember when I heard those things at first, I was just like, really exercise? Like, that's not going to help me. And then it's like, well, there's a reason why people tell you to do these things. It's because they work. They work. Again, it's not going to switch off the anxiety, but it's going to help to create the best possible conditions for you to turn down those levels of anxiety over time. But it's not something that can be solved in a minute. In the same way that if you change any habit, you don't just like change the habit in a minute. You don't change like a diet immediately. You don't
still
change.
Smoke. I didn't get rid of that, so it's difficult. Some habits are difficult.
Yeah, for sure. And so with all that said, Hugo, how I know you've made some references to it, but like, how did your recovery start? And I guess kind of with more focus on the last experience with DP, and how did the recovery start from that episode?
Started right away. Because I had the experience, I told myself, I'm gonna work on this at any cost. So in that sense, I guess because I had already had this experience, it was easier for me to start the process. But that doesn't mean that it was easy. The process was easy. The process was very cumbersome. But my recovery started the day after I had this huge panic attack. When I woke up and I said, I called my work. I said, I need some days off. I'm sorry. I went to my psychiatrist. It's the same that I saw when I was 15. I was in a very bad shape. Talked to him for some hours. We discussed some things, and then the recovery started right away. And I found this program. I thought, yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about, because I already knew what DPDR was. And when I got your manual, I thought it was kind of an investment in myself. And I studied with that manual for the first month. We also had a meeting, both of us, for to talk about my process in March, and well, it started the day after. Like, I remember going to a huge mall here in Lisbon, like 2 days after this panic attack, feeling like crap, complete crap. But I went there. So in that sense, I did the right work, but also I did it not because of I'm a really strong person, but because I knew what had to be done, because I had been through this before, and it took a while, and I feel and it's worth it. It's worth it, especially when you start to see the feedback loop in the positive side. Not in the, and you feel like, for instance, yesterday I was a bit anxious, and I felt a bit anxious, and I was like, why am I feeling this? And it lasted for some minutes, and I said, yeah, I need to rest a bit. I need probably to go for a while. And after a while, I was thinking already on, I need to make a song. I need to think about this song, and I felt not very well all day, because I'm probably a bit sick. It's getting very cold here in Portugal. But it was only that. It was a bad day. Yeah, I felt a bit anxious. It's normal. People feel anxious. But the feedback loop, the positive one, is bigger. There's the part in my recovery where I felt that now it's 50-50. Nice. It's 50-50. There's no snowball. I have as much bad as good. And after a while, I knew that if I continue doing the work, I would have more good than bad. And when that happens, it's good for two reasons. One, you start feeling better, happier, more serenity, and also the anxiety doesn't disappear. We are human, but when it appears, it lasts. You can put it on a shelf. I didn't sleep well today. I probably don't feel. You don't go. There's no direct shortcut to the spiral of anxiety and panic. My recovery started The next day, I had that huge panic attack. I felt I was in the recovery path when one day I felt that I was kind of 50-50. But this took a while. This is not, you don't wake up one day. Sometimes you wake up and you have a day without DPDR after a while, and then the next day you feel awful. This is just your brain telling you to go in there. It still needs to process stuff. And I felt that I made a I made a chart. After a while, I made a chart. This I don't advise any people to. I mean, it can become a compulsion. It didn't become in my case, but you have to be careful with this also. In my case, I did a chart and it helped me a lot. Why? Because if I was feeling a bad day, I would look at the chart and I would see, oh, this day was awful, and the next 2 days after, I was feeling great. So it became kind of a rational way for me to look at the past on an Excel and look, yeah, I felt today it feels bad, but that day I'm seeing on the chart I made, I was feeling like 3 times worse. So it gave me a sense of relativity, between what I was feeling, and it showed me clearly that I was going down in terms of symptoms, of course, down at the beginning with a lot of variance, and then like more stable and getting better until someday I just hit the zero and then I never looked at the graphic again because it had some value for me to give me this sense of security, but at some point I just stopped looking at it. But you have to be careful with this, not to treat it as another compulsion, like today was better. Yes, if you go that way, just don't do it. For me it worked.
So Hugo, how was the DP manual helpful in your recovery?
It was kind of like I said, like a mantra. I would just use it as a way not to. Of course, in the beginning, I just read it end to end and took all the notes I needed to take in terms of what would help me. Even though I had already this DPDR experience, it was also helpful to have someone giving me more insight and more ways to explore to try to help in my situation. And after a while, I just would repeat either in the videos or in the like reading the manual, the passages that were more relevant for my situation at the time. One of those was like, you have bad days, good days, and bad days, because the bad days are awful. You feel like you're stuck in there, like everything is the same. It was exactly like you said. It was like you say in the manual, like when you may be recovering, but then in the day that if a bad day strikes, you feel like you're back to square one. So that was really important for me to kind of get this reassurance for especially in the first times where the anxiety was big, still big, and I needed to ease myself and calm myself down and to get the right strategies and motivation also to do the work.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Something that I always find useful, especially when I'm speaking to people in coaching sessions, is to say that, we often have this worry that like, well, what happens if I have a bad day? I feel like I'm back to square one. Or if I have a panic attack while I'm recovering, then I might just be back to square one. What I always say is that, well, you can't get back to square one. Like square one was when this first happened and you didn't understand it, when you had no idea what was happening. You didn't know there was a word to describe what you were experiencing. You thought you were probably going crazy. Maybe you thought you had damaged your brain with drugs, that you were high and you couldn't come down. That's square one. Now that you understand what this is, you're on the path to recovery. Maybe there's ups and downs on the way, but you can't go back to square one. If you wanted to, you couldn't get back. You couldn't get back to square one. You know,
it's impossible.
Yeah.
And as I tell in my story, even though that panic attack was huge and lasted for hours, 2 days after I was in a much better state because of my previous experience.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Hugo, now that you've recovered, is getting back to normal really getting back to normal? It sounds like you're a pretty busy guy.
Yeah, I work. I work on my music also, and I like to do sports. I do Muay Thai and kickboxing since I'm 17, and
Nice.
It's a great part of my life. I like to climb. I like to surf. I like to do a lot of stuff, and I think recovering and getting back to normal was also gradually to start doing these things again and putting my body and my mind focusing on this stuff again, and not feeling so overwhelmed with existential thoughts and physical anxiety. Also recovering. I mean, I cannot lie. There was once or twice, like I was like surfing in the summer and just looking at the sky and the waves, and I was like, it's good to be back to normal. You know, sometimes I had these spikes of dopamine, like saying like, yeah, I overcome this. But in general, it's kind of a gradual process where you just don't feel it that much. And sometimes you can acknowledge it, and I think it's good to acknowledge it. But it's not like you just make a huge party. And, I mean, I can do it. I was actually thinking about making a dinner with friends and family just to also to thank them for the support and to kind of celebrating this turn of cycle. But it's not. In your personal life, it's not like you just woke up one day and I'm recovered. This is amazing. I'm not feeling like I was feeling. It takes a while, and so it's a gradual process, and you don't notice that growth because it's so gradual. So recovering is just starting doing your normal stuff, being tired, being sad, being anxious, being happy, being excited, feeling. Being more less drawn into a whirlpool or into a tornado of emotions, and just living your life as good things, bad things. Life is complicated. It's complex, but without that heavy bag of the DPDR. And so it's not like you say, recovery. It's not like you just turn the switch off and now everything's okay. No, you gradually start to notice that you are not spending 2 or 3 hours a day in the YouTube videos about DPDR. You gradually understand that you don't need, even not looking at your own manual all the time. It's also part of it. It's like understanding that the things that were tools, much needed tools, now don't take such a bigger part of your life. And I think these are the signs of recovery. And then you will feel these spikes of anxiety, of adrenaline, and I think these are the times where you can rely on the manual. Also in the later stages, you can rely on the manual, and you can rely on your own confidence in yourself. That these bad days are the key to overcome, because I really felt, even in my chart, my graphic, sometimes the big, when I would get better, was the day before was the day that I would feel really bad. So it's kind of, I don't know, this is just a guess, but kind of I would have a really bad day before I would have a substantial quality improvement in my DPDR condition. So it seemed like kind of, something was processing, and if I would pass that test, then I would go through another level, putting it, of course, in very simple terms. So I guess it's part of recovery also to have these bad days and process all these feelings and sensations, and kind of being okay with discomfort. I think it's tough. It's easier to say than done, but you will. I think you will be on in recovery when you feel like you can be okay with your own discomfort and say, yeah, I'm feeling like crap today, but I'm not going into a forum where people that just went into this whirlpool like to grab about the fact that they are inside of this whirlpool forever.
I think as well, what you're saying about getting back to normal, and when you think, I mean, for me, and I've said this many times before, but for me, I always thought, like, God, if I ever get out of DPDR, I'm gonna party, like I'm just gonna go, like, I'm gonna go to Thailand for 6 months and just party nonstop, like. But that's based on the idea that, like, you'll wake up the next day and it'll be completely gone. Which doesn't happen because you're training yourself out of a habit. So by the nature of recovery, because it's a process that happens over time, you just kind of get used to your normal life happening again. So then the idea of throwing a massive party, you kind of go, well, I mean, I've got other stuff to do, so I'm not too concerned with that anymore. But and certainly I would have definitely had a couple of moments like that where I, like you said, when you were surfing, like, where, I remember in the maybe year or two after I recovered, where I did have a couple of moments where I just thought, like, I felt so grateful just to be back to normal, back to especially kind of pursuing my career and working in film. I just thought, yeah, Jesus, I'm so happy to be able to do this again. And so, Hugo, there's going to be people watching this. One more question. There's going to be people watching this who may be going through something very similar to what you went through. Maybe they're even their second or third, like, bout of depersonalization, going through maybe what you went through back even when you were 14 years old. If you were to talk to yourself back then, and if you were to give yourself or give those people advice on their situation, what would that be?
Have hope. Understand that there will be bad days and it will take time. Work on simple things, like, first, try to sleep better, try to be with friends. This is, at least for me, was very important. Connections. Understand that it will be probably a long road. There is no answer for how long it will be, but if you do that work, it will not be the longest road that you will have to overcome in your life. Don't beat yourself up if you do all those stuff, because it's completely normal, but try to not be caught in forums, especially forums, because it's a pity that I see so many kids that think that these advices, like sleep better, be with friends, do sports, they're like, these guys just give random bullshit, and they think they know what DPDR. But I have my badge of DPDR here, and I know what DPDR is, and this Sean or whatever that is talking about DPDR is he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I know what DPDR is, and it's so difficult and it's so bad that it doesn't get cured, or you cannot overcome it with just sleeping better. And this cycle, it's what makes these people in 5, 6, 7, 10 years of DPDR, because they just start to identify with the anxiety, with this feeling, and then because it's a defense mechanism. They get so identified with this defense mechanism that they don't know how to relieve themselves from it. And to relieve themselves from it is to say, yeah, probably let's work on this. Let's try to sleep better. Let's try to make sports instead of spending all day in forums. So I think this is a pretty big one in the recovery process. And be with friends, of course, have some reassurance from time to time. Try to not do it like all the time. Sometimes just sit with the discomfort. Don't try to teach yourself that sometimes if you feel like, even if a full day of discomfort, try to not ask, is this going to be better? Am I going to be okay? Try to gain confidence in yourself. Sometimes just ask you, I'm feeling just awful. Just, you think I'm going to get out of this? Yeah, of course you will. I believe in you, and this is good. But sometimes just go through it and know, yeah, I had a shitty day. Tomorrow it will be better. Because confidence in yourself is also very important. Reassurance is the sign of normal reassurance is a sign of being human. Constant reassurance is a sign of lack of confidence in yourself. So this is my immediate response to your answer. But there are so many things, but I think the rest of it is in this conversation. Have hope, do the work, try to see what fits for yourself. If it's running, if it's going for a walk, if it's swimming, if it's sleeping, trying to read a book and you sleep better if you do that. If it's meditation, for some people it works, for some people it doesn't. There are so many things you can do, and you will have very bad days. And ride that wave, because don't think you will not have it. Because if you think you will not have it, the moment you have it, you just go down. Go through this path, understanding that there will be bad days or weeks. It's worth it.
Yeah, it's part of recovery for sure. That's really good advice. Hugo, it's been so lovely speaking with you today, man. Thank you for being with us on the channel. Thank you for taking the time. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to share your experience and your advice and your honesty about the whole experience. I know there's people watching this today who will find it extremely helpful. And it was great to chat to you, man. And keep up the good work. And and once again, make sure to share your the links to Too Many Sons, your band,
so much.
in the video description and across wherever this is shared. And I'm looking forward to having listened myself. So take care, Hugo, and thank you again.
Take care, Sean, and thank you for your work also helping people. I think it's very important.
My pleasure. Thanks, Hugo. Take care.